It only takes a moment for everything to shatter. Emily Walker stood on the balcony, the cool night air wrapping around her like a cloak of silence. Below her, the city pulsed with life. The skyscrapers lit up like stars in the endless dark sky. She had once believed that love was her guiding star, the constant that would never falter. But tonight, everything had changed. She had been prepared for a celebration, for the elegance of a perfect evening, but fate had other plans. Richard, her husband, had invited her to what seemed like a night of luxury and love, a dinner to commemorate their years together. Little did she know, it was the night her world would come crashing down. The laughter around her felt distant, as if she were floating above it all. She had dressed carefully, wearing a gown that shimmered like liquid silver, her makeup perfect, her smile a facade. Richard had promised her that night would be unforgettable. But what she hadn't expected was the unmistakable glance, the whispered words, the cold betrayal hanging in the air. He hadn't meant for her to find out. Not like this. Not in front of the guests. Not as he laughed with another woman, his arm casually draped around her shoulders. Emily had tried to laugh it off at first, playing the role of the perfect wife, the woman who stood by her man no matter what. But as the minutes ticked by, she could feel the tension building inside her. The weight of the situation pressed down on her chest, suffocating her. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The man she had loved, the man she had supported through thick and thin, had humiliated her in the worst possible way. He hadn't just betrayed her trust. He had betrayed the love they had built together, the future they had promised to each other. As the evening went on, she could feel the eyes of the room on her, watching, waiting for her to react. But Emily wasn't going to let them see her break. She wasn't going to let Richard see her crumble. She stood up slowly, her heels clicking on the marble floor as she walked toward the exit. The room fell silent. She didn't look back, not once. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and in that moment, Emily knew that everything had changed. She had lost Richard, but she had gained something far more important, her own dignity. And from that moment on, she was determined to build an empire that no one could ever take from her. She would rise from the ashes of betrayal and make her own destiny. This was just the beginning of her transformation. The world would soon learn her name, and they would know her as a force to be reckoned with. No longer the woman in the background of her husband's life, but the woman in control of her own future. Emily stood on the rooftop of her small apartment building, the city skyline stretching out before her. The lights of the city below seemed to mirror the fire that burned within her. The night she had walked away from Richard, from the life she had built with him, felt like a distant memory now. It had been weeks, but the echoes of that evening still lingered. She had spent the days that followed in a daze, sorting through the pieces of her shattered life. The betrayal had hit her harder than she ever imagined, but she refused to let it define her. The feeling of humiliation had given way to something else, something stronger. She was no longer the woman who stood silently by while others dictated her future. The fire inside her grew stronger every day. The world was vast, and now it was hers for the taking. She had no more time for self-pity, no more room for regrets. Emily had a purpose. As she walked down the street toward the coffee shop, her mind raced. She had already started making plans. She had connections, business partners, investors, people who believed in her, who saw the potential in her ideas. The brand she envisioned wasn't just about luxury goods or fame. It was about empowerment. It was about turning the tables and showing the world that a woman could rise, not just from the ashes of betrayal, but from the very heart of the industry that had once dismissed her. Emily's hands were steady as she entered the coffee shop. She ordered her usual, a latte with an extra shot of espresso, and sat at the corner table. She had learned to embrace moments like these, where everything around her was calm, yet her mind was racing with possibilities. It was in these moments of quiet solitude that the next steps became clear. She had always wanted more than what her marriage had given her. She had always known she was capable of more. Richard had never understood her drive. He had seen her as nothing more than a beautiful accessory, a woman to stand beside him at charity galas and social events. But that wasn't who she was, and she wouldn't let him define her any longer. The phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from an old acquaintance, someone who had offered to help her get her start in the fashion world years ago, but she had never taken the offer seriously. Now, everything had changed. She took a deep breath and typed back, "I'm ready. Let's talk." A sense of calm washed over her. This was the beginning of something new, something hers. The weeks that followed were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and planning. Emily poured every ounce of her energy into the business, channeling the pain of her past into something tangible. Her vision was clear: create a brand that stood for strength, beauty, and resilience. She would design clothes that made women feel empowered, that spoke to their inner strength, and that helped them rise above their circumstances. The first collection she launched was a hit. It wasn't long before her designs were being featured in the press, and the orders began to flood in. Emily had finally found her place. She wasn't just building a brand. She was building a legacy, one that would outshine anything she had ever done in her marriage. She wasn't just a woman scorned anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with, and she would make sure the world knew it. Emily stood in front of the full-length mirror in her office, adjusting the crimson dress that had become her signature. The fabric clung to her frame, a symbol of the transformation she had undergone. She had come a long way from the woman who had walked out of the dinner that night, broken and humiliated. Now, she was someone entirely different, a woman with a vision, a mission, and an empire that was beginning to take shape. The phone rang on her desk, breaking her thoughts. She picked it up. The voice on the other end was familiar. "Emily, your collection sold out. The press is calling it the comeback story of the year." Her heart skipped a beat. She had always known her designs were special, but this was more than she had ever expected. She had done it. She had built something real, something that couldn't be taken away from her. She thanked the person on the other end and hung up, her mind already racing with the next steps. The world was taking notice. Emily's brand wasn't just a clothing line, it was a statement. It represented resilience, power, and the ability to rise above. It spoke to women who had been overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed. Women who had felt small, invisible. She had been there, and now she was offering them a way to reclaim their strength. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Interviews, photo shoots, meetings with investors. All of it was happening so fast. She had gone from being Richard's wife to a name people were talking about. It wasn't just the fashion world that had taken notice. The media, influencers, and women across the country were starting to rally behind her. Emily had created more than a brand. She had created a movement. But even as her success grew, there were moments when the past tried to creep in. Richard would send her messages, asking for meetings, begging for her forgiveness. At first, Emily had considered responding. There was a part of her that still remembered the man she had fallen in love with. But each time she thought about it, she remembered the humiliation, the way he had treated her. She wasn't that woman anymore. The woman she had become was strong, independent, and unwilling to let anyone define her again. As the months passed, Emily's empire continued to grow. She expanded her brand, hired a team, and launched a new line that was even more successful than the first. She wasn't just surviving. She was thriving. One day, as Emily walked into her office, she noticed a familiar face in the lobby. It was Richard. He had come to see her, to ask for a chance to explain himself. Emily stopped for a moment, her heart beating faster than usual. She hadn't seen him in months, and yet, seeing him there brought back memories she thought she had buried. She took a deep breath, her expression unreadable, and walked past him without a word. She didn't need to hear his excuses anymore. She had built something far greater than the life they had shared. As she entered her office, she sat down at her desk, looking out the window at the city below. She had made it. She had turned her pain into power, and there was nothing anyone could do to take that away from her. Emily stood at the window of her apartment, the skyline of the city glowing beneath the moonlight. The hum of the city felt distant now, as if she were no longer a part of it. She had become something more than she had ever imagined, a woman who had risen from the ashes of a broken marriage to create her own empire. But even with all the success, there was a new feeling inside her, a sense of calm, of peace that she hadn't realized she was missing. It was the kind of peace that came from within, from knowing she was in control of her own destiny. The phone buzzed on the table beside her, breaking her thoughts. She picked it up, expecting it to be another call about the business. But instead, it was a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. It's important." The message was simple, but it struck a chord deep within her. Her heart skipped a beat. She recognized the tone of the message, the urgency that came with it. It was Richard. For a moment, Emily hesitated. The past few months had been about moving forward, building something new, something for herself. She had promised herself that she wouldn't go back, wouldn't let him pull her into the chaos of their old life. Yet, there was a part of her that wondered, what could he possibly want now? With a deep breath, she typed her reply. I'm listening. The response came almost immediately. Meet me at the office. 7 p.m. Emily put the phone down, her mind racing. She hadn't seen Richard in months, not since the night she had walked away from their life together. She had no idea what he could want, but there was a nagging feeling in the back of her mind that wouldn't let her ignore the message. She couldn't help but wonder if this was the moment when everything would change again. At 7 p.m., Emily arrived at the office building. The streets outside were bustling, the usual traffic of New York City, but inside, the world felt oddly still. She walked into the lobby and made her way to the elevator. Her reflection in the polished walls seemed almost unfamiliar, like a stranger who had overcome so much. The doors opened on the top floor, and there, standing in front of the sleek glass doors of the office, was Richard. He looked exactly the same as she remembered, but there was something different in his eyes, something she couldn't quite place. He stepped forward as the doors opened, and their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt heavy, laden with all the things unsaid. Finally, Richard broke the silence. Emily, I've made a mess of everything. I owe you an apology. His words were measured, almost careful, as if he were treading on fragile ground. Emily's heart tightened. She hadn't expected this, not after everything. He was the last person she had imagined would ever apologize. But as she looked at him, she realized it didn't matter anymore. It wasn't about the apology, about the past. It was about what came next. I don't need your apology, Richard. I've moved on. I've built something of my own, something I never thought I could do. I'm proud of what I've become. The words were steady, firm. She wasn't the same woman who had once cowered in his shadow. She was someone entirely different. Richard nodded slowly, a look of understanding in his eyes. I can see that. I've watched you from afar, Emily. I never knew you had this kind of strength. Emily felt a small pang in her chest at his words, but it was fleeting. She had no need for his validation anymore. I don't need anyone's approval, Richard. Not yours, not anyone's. I've created this life on my terms. And that's enough for me. She turned to leave, the door sliding open in front of her. Goodbye, Richard, she said softly, her voice unwavering. As she walked out of the office, the weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying seemed to lift. The city felt brighter, the possibilities endless. This was her life now, and no one, least of all Richard, could take that from her. Emily walked through the city, the cold wind cutting through her coat as she made her way to her next meeting. The events of the past few weeks had unfolded so quickly that she hardly had time to process everything. Yet, in every step she took, there was an overwhelming sense of clarity. Her life, once dictated by the whims of others, was now her own to control. She had learned the hard way that success didn't come from being the perfect wife or the perfect partner. It came from knowing what you wanted, understanding your worth, and never backing down from the pursuit of your dreams. As she entered the building for her meeting, Emily felt a sense of calm settle over her. She had spent so many years working to make others proud, and now, she was working to make herself proud. She had built this empire, this brand that spoke to women everywhere. Women who felt the same way she had. Overlooked, underestimated, but capable of so much more than anyone ever realized. The room was filled with investors and executives, each one eager to see what Emily had to offer next. She had learned to walk into rooms like this with confidence, never second-guessing her abilities. She had something to prove, not to them, but to herself. As she presented her new project, her voice steady and assured, she saw the looks of admiration in their eyes. Emily didn't need to rely on anyone else's validation anymore. She had earned this. She had built it from the ground up. By the time the meeting was over, the deal was practically done. The investors were impressed, eager to get on board with her vision. Emily smiled to herself as she left the building. She had done it again. She had proven, once and for all, that she could make her mark in this world on her terms. Later that evening, as Emily sat in her apartment, She allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She thought about Richard and the life they had once shared. She remembered the love they had. But more than that, she remembered the pain, the constant feeling of being unappreciated, the moments when she had been nothing more than an accessory to his success. But that was over. The woman she had become no longer needed to be defined by her past. She had carved out her own path, and it was one that was filled with strength, resilience, and endless possibilities. Emily knew that her journey wasn't over. It would never be. There would always be new challenges, new opportunities to face. But for the first time in her life, she felt at peace. She was no longer waiting for permission to live her life. She had created a life that was hers, and she would continue to build it, one step at a time. The future stretched out before her, and Emily was ready for whatever came next. Emily woke up to the soft glow of the morning sun filtering through her bedroom window. The world outside was still, peaceful, as if it too recognized the significance of the new chapter she had entered. She stretched, feeling the warmth of the sheets and the comfort of her own space. It had been a long road, filled with challenges, setbacks, and moments of self-doubt. But now, as she stood on the precipice of everything she had worked for, there was nothing but clarity. She had come so far, built something that not only represented her professional success, but also her personal growth. She had turned her pain into power and had finally taken control of her own narrative. The phone buzzed on her nightstand, snapping her back to reality. She reached over, picking it up. It was a text from her business partner. "We have an important meeting today. Investors are expecting you." Emily smiled to herself. It had been months since she had been in this position, months since she had felt the excitement of a new venture, a new opportunity to prove herself. The road ahead was still long, but now, she faced it with a sense of certainty she had never known before. She dressed quickly, choosing a sleek black suit that made her feel powerful and in control. She had learned the importance of presentation, but she had also learned that true strength came from within. As she arrived at the meeting, the room was already filled with the top investors and industry leaders, each one eager to hear her pitch. But Emily wasn't nervous. She had done the work. She had built a brand that spoke for itself. She had earned her place at the table, and she wasn't going to let anyone forget that. As she began speaking, her voice steady and clear, she saw the look of respect in the eyes of her audience. They weren't just hearing her words, they were feeling the weight of her journey. Emily knew that the future of her company was secured, not because of the validation she would receive from this room, but because she had learned to believe in herself. The meeting went smoothly, and before long, the investors were signing the deal, excited to be part of her vision. As Emily left the building, the weight of the last few years seemed to lift from her shoulders. She had created something lasting, something that would endure long after the meetings and contracts were signed. She had built an empire, but more importantly, she had built herself. The city stretched before her, a landscape of endless possibilities. There were still battles to fight, still mountains to climb, but Emily was ready for whatever came next. The woman who had once walked away from everything had now become someone who could never be overlooked. She had proven herself, not just to the world, but to the one person who mattered most, herself. Emily sat in her favorite chair, overlooking the city from her apartment, a soft cup of coffee resting in her hands. The skyline stretched before her, a reminder of the long journey she had taken to get here. The empire she had built was flourishing, but even with all the success, she knew that there was still more to be done. More opportunities to seize, more battles to win. Yet, for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace, knowing that she was the one in control of her destiny. Her past, filled with betrayal and pain, had shaped her into the woman she had become. She had used those experiences as stepping stones, and now, she stood tall, proud of what she had accomplished. But there was still a part of her that wondered what it would be like to have someone by her side who truly understood her journey. She had built an empire, but in the quiet moments, when the business world quieted down, she couldn't help but think about the future. Could she truly have it all? A life filled with love, success, and fulfillment? She was used to doing things on her own, relying on no one but herself. But maybe, just maybe, there was room for something more. The doorbell rang, snapping her out of her thoughts. She wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment, she hesitated before walking toward the door. When she opened it, She was surprised to see a familiar face, Richard. He stood there, looking almost unsure of himself. I didn't expect to see you here, Emily said, her voice calm but guarded. Richard smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. I know, but I had to see you again. I know I've made mistakes, Emily, and I've watched you from afar, seeing how far you've come. I've never been more proud of you. Emily felt a flicker of something. Was it nostalgia? Regret? She couldn't be sure. It had been a long time since she had seen him, and even though the memories of their time together were filled with both love and pain, she had moved on. You don't need to tell me that, Emily said softly. I've already proven who I am, not to you, but to myself. I don't need validation anymore. There was a long pause before Richard spoke again. I know, and I'm sorry. I never understood what you were capable of until now. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted to say it. I was wrong, Emily. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. Emily looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. I don't need your apology, Richard, but I appreciate you coming here to say it. You've had your chance, and I've had mine. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't mean going back. It means moving forward on my own terms. Richard nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. He had no more words to offer, only a quiet respect. I hope you find what you're looking for, Emily. I really do. Emily watched as he turned and walked away, feeling a strange sense of closure wash over her. As she closed the door, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She had made it. She had rebuilt her life, her career, and her sense of self-worth. And now, for the first time, she felt completely free. The world was hers for the taking, and she was ready for whatever came next. Emily smiled to herself as she turned back to the window, the city stretching out before her like a canvas of endless possibilities. She had everything she needed to succeed. And the future? It was all hers.